So I called this talk "How to Become a Social Powerhouse," which is interesting because I started working on it, and then I'm like, because it's been a busy week, and then I'm like, okay, most of what I'm going to talk about is actually not necessarily directly about being a social powerhouse, but we'll tie it in. So, being a social powerhouse. Anyone here think of ways that we can really be the most sociable people, loved by everyone in the right way? Obviously, you don't want to be loved by evil and then not know how to
Just
say
act
no.
like Rabbi Jack.
No, no, that's wrong. Right? So what's
So humble. Wow, look at that.
yeah,
A lesson,
exactly.
guys.
What
Pay
I'm gonna
attention.
say. Yes, exactly. Everyone should be like me. Okay, we're done. Good night. Right? So what are the tools do you think? I will tell you two things that we can do to really be loved by everyone. One of them is direct and one of them is indirect. So, directly, how to be loved by people is when you speak to them, you compliment them. Period. That's it. Give them a compliment. Hey, Omri, I love that purple shirt that you're wearing. It's really nice. Right? And you might all say that that's the most ridiculous compliment ever. But you know what? Omri feels good, right? Omri, do you feel a bit good right now? He's going to say no.
No, I actually feel pretty bad about
Okay, I
it, but
told you he's
thanks
going to say
anyway.
no.
I'm
So,
kidding.
what? You kidding? It's
No, yeah,
amazing.
I do. I appreciate it. If you really mean it, that is, and you're not just using me as an example.
No, I really mean it.
It's a
It's
cool
amazing
shirt.
how things work. We get excited by a like. You know, someone liked. Oh my gosh, someone liked. I like. Who was it? Oh, it was myself. I liked myself. So we get excited about a like, and that's crazy. What is it already? Someone liked what I said and pressed a button. That's it, a button, and that makes me feel good, right? So it doesn't cost us to give compliments, but that is one of the most powerful ways to be loved by the person in front of you. I don't know how you make that food. How do you do it? Can you tell me how you do it? So, what's the reason why we can't really give compliments? Anyone have a good idea of why it's so hard for us to compliment? Any thoughts?
Because we're not nice.
No, I have some thoughts.
Go for it.
Um, because you're not nice. No, I'm kidding. So, um, you know, so you're afraid you might be rejected, but depending on your level of self consciousness, you also don't. You might have you. This kind of goes along with the idea of being rejected, but you're afraid that you might be outed as an imposter, right? You're afraid that you might give a compliment, but maybe the compliment doesn't come off as genuine, and it just gets brushed off, and you don't get paid attention to. So compliments are, it depends on your intentions, just like with everything. But
Mm-hmm.
you don't want to try to play the bargaining. You don't want to behave very not bargaining, but you don't want to behave very transactionally when it comes to giving compliments.
That's true. You want it to be legitimate. That's a very good point. You want it to be real. Some people will not give a compliment because they want it to really be sincere. And if it sounds like I'm trying to gain something from you, I'll avoid making the compliment. That's true. Um, but I think that even if I'm worried that someone might think of me as gaining something, we have to still compliment because it works. People like it. They want to hear it. They want to know that they're okay, that they're accepted, that something that they're doing is nice, that it's wanted. So I think that it's a good point what you're saying. People avoid it because they want to be coming over as sincere and non-transactional. Um, but I think that there's another point here of why people don't compliment, and that's a lack of self-esteem. Because if I don't feel good enough within myself, I feel hard. It's difficult for me to compliment them because I want that. It's like I wanted that. Yeah, I wish I can have that popularity. I wish I can have that fame. I wish I can have that car. I wish I can. So it's very hard for me to compliment someone because we say tov ayin hu yivorach. A good-eyed person, a person with a good eye. What does it mean, a good eye? You're able to look at things in a positive light. So you see someone's car and you're like, I wish that person's success with their car. Right? So tov ayin hu yivorach. You bring blessings into your life when you do that. Not only because you get closer to those people, but also because if you wish it on others, God's going to wish it on you. That's a Jewish belief. So the answer to giving compliments, the reasons, the excuses why we don't give compliments, either because it might not look sincere, or there are definitely times where you have to have some element of truth in you. You can't be completely fake, right, Omri? You can't be absolutely completely fake, but you've got to feel it, and eventually it's going to be translated into that conversation with that person. This is the way to get close to people, is to compliment them, to go up to them and say, hey, that's it. Social powerhouse, complimentary. So that's the first thing. The second thing is indirect, and that's when you're not with them. And it starts also to do with a lack of self-confidence, self-esteem, and it's to do with lashon hara. How am I talking about somebody even when they're not around? And that's really the topic of tonight, Tazria and Metzora, this week's Torah portion, which is all about the idea of Metzora. So this time that we're in a time between Passover and Shavuot. We all know, right? We're counting the Omer, and during this time, Rabbi Akiva lost his. Oh, there you go. How to Win Friends and Influence People. It's a very good book. It's definitely recommended to those that really want to know how to. And I'm sure that he talks about compliments a lot in there. But right, Omri? He does?
Yeah, no, he does. I mean, basically, I'm interested in hearing the Jewish perspective, but like I feel like the way you started it off, it reminded me of other books too, but like exactly like that book. And I linked specifically to the section, to the section where he talks about, you know, one of the ways to get people to like you is by giving them, by listening sincerely, but also giving them like compliments, right? But
right,
you know, you have to give compliments in a certain way. Anyway,
listening.
I don't mean to.
Listening is so important too.
Yeah.
So just one second, I'm going to close my door. Listening is definitely a good one. So, but I think that there's something else, which is indirect. See, we have a rule in Jewish teaching. What comes out your heart goes into someone else's heart. And this goes back to the point of sincerity. If you are sincere with what you're saying, you can have two people teaching the same information, the same class. One loves their job, and the kids in the school love that teacher. One hates their job, and the kids in the school hate that teacher. They're both teaching the same thing. Because one, if you love what you do, then you could be saying the same information, but it's not going to go through your heart into somebody else's heart. The best form of education is when you really believe in it yourself. You can't teach values that you don't live by. You can't teach values that you don't have dear to your heart. And once it is close to your heart, it's just going to penetrate straight through to the other person. Right? So much of what we say is to do with our emotions, not just the intellect. When I speak to someone, my emotions need to be also expressed for that person to accept my information. Does this make sense? That this is the only reason why speaking is so. The way to get your information over is to really feel like I mean it. And what's that to do with being indirectly loved by the people around you is because when you're a loving personality, even when they're not, right, even when that person's not around you, then that's going to be translated in your relationship. So being a social powerhouse is actually, even when you're not sociable, it's a lot more to do with when you're not sociable, when you're in your own room, how you're thinking about people. What is your back thought about this friend or that person? Are you speaking lashon hara? Lashon hara is the key to avoiding that negative language that is a spiral. It goes downhill. How lashon hara works is I start talking about one person bad, and then I'm like, oh, this actually helps me because it makes me elevate myself. That's what I think, and bring that person down. And then I go down a spiral where I get used to that. And I constantly talk. Negativity is contagious within us. And when I start being negative, I get contagious with it. And then the next day I'm also negative. And the next day I'm a little bit more. And then the next day I'm a little bit more. Positivity is also contagious within us. If I'm positive, then the next day it goes up levels. That's why marriage and life and many things can be worked on, is because the minute you start changing your path, you can start going upwards or you can go downwards. It's a spiral. We get in a habit of certain patterns of the way we speak. So if you want to be a social powerhouse, this is it. It's in your own bedroom. It's when no one's around you. It's what you do when no one's watching. And I think that is something that maybe he doesn't talk about in how to win and influence people. But I think that's where it all starts. Because when you're standing in front of someone, are you angry? Are you negative? Are you positive? It's going to be portrayed into that person's heart. What comes out your heart is going to go into that person's heart. Period. And if you've got anger in your heart, that's what he's going to feel or she's going to feel. If you have love in your heart, that's what they're going to feel. It's simple. So that's exactly why in Judaism, leprosy, Lashon Hara, is such a big thing. 2 Torah portions this week, Tazria and Metzora, 2 Torah portions. There's just over 30 verses, 30 psukim on the creation of the universe. That's a pretty big deal, right? 30 psukim, 30 verses on the creation of the universe. But when it comes to Lashon Hara, talking gossip, there's hundreds of verses on it. Why is it so severe? So most people look at it and they say, okay, this is annoying. Judaism with its Lashon Hara business, That's how most people react. Is like, why is it so obsessed with Lashon Hara, gossip? Why is it so obsessed with it? And the answer is, for you, more than the person, according to Judaism, you can't speak Lashon Hara even when the person's not around you. You know that? Even when you might say, okay, he's in another country. He doesn't even know about it. Yeah, because Lashon Hara is not about the person you're talking about. It's about how it affects you much more. It destroys you. And it destroys you because if you're talking bad about this person, you're also talking bad about me. You're talking bad about everyone. Who says I'm not any different? When I sit with people that speak gossip, I say to myself, the next person they're going to speak about is me. And I wouldn't want them to do that. So the same way I don't want them to do that about me, how do I know? Well, because the way we are is a habit. It's a pattern. If I'm always negative, then I'm going to continue to being negative. I'm just going to continue being negative. So it's interesting because this is the time between Passover and receiving the Torah. And the Jewish people were on a major high between them and God. In Judaism, there's 2 aspects of growth that we work on, between us and God and between us and the other humans. So whilst they were receiving the Torah, they got on a super high between them and God. We've mentioned this before. Ben Adam Lemakom was getting really strong. They were like, wow, this is amazing. We are strong between us and God. But then what happens is when in a world like that, you start neglecting humans. You say to yourself, wow, I'm so connected. You can, not that you will. You can. I'm so connected to Hashem. Who cares about the people around me? I could start ignoring the people around me because all that matters to me is my connection to the oneness of God. So that's the biggest danger for someone who's very, very spiritual, very connected to Hashem, is that he can easily neglect his connection with other human beings, his interaction with other human beings. It's very dangerous. And that's exactly what happened to Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva and his 24,000 students all passed away during this time. That's why we don't shave. There's a slight mourning period that we're in between Passover and Lag BaOmer, where we don't shave, we don't listen to music. Beards, can't shave your beard, right? But we don't listen to music, and we are in some form of mourning. Why? because Rabbi Akiva and his 24,000 students died of what? A plague. Interesting. They died of a plague called Askara. But the rabbis say that's not the reason why they died. That's just a plague. What's the spiritual reason? There's always a spiritual reason behind everything, which is also what I wanted to get to. So the rabbis say, because lo nahagu kavod ze lazeh, they didn't respect each other. How can it be? 24,000 students of Rabbi Akiva. They were the greatest of the greats. Lo nahagu kavod ze bazeh. They didn't honor each other well on their level. And they had a plague. You see, the world would look at it, an atheist would look at that story and say, there was a plague. But in Judaism, we don't do that. We look at a plague and we say there's a deeper reason behind the plague, right? We look at COVID-19. We don't just say there's a COVID-19. There's something deeper that's going on behind it. We don't just look for the cure. We look for the spiritual DNA behind it. Because there's something much more. When we try and cure, you see, we've got the vaccine now, so that's just dealing with the symptoms. But we're not getting to the core of the problem. We have to get to the core of the problem. So in Judaism, whenever there's a problem in the world, we get to the core. In the times of the Arizal, anyone that's been to Tzfat, you see the Kabbalists that are, right, the stories of the Kabbalists that were buried there. So the Arizal was a big, big rabbi that lived a good few hundred years ago, and he brought Kabbalah back to the world. And he was a big Kabbalah. When anyone would go to him with a certain sickness or something that's wrong with them, their arm hurts, their leg hurts, their body hurts, he wouldn't give them a cure. He would tell them which mitzvah they would need to work on, and that would be the cure of them. You understand that? He would tell them, oh, if your arm hurts, maybe he wouldn't say maybe, you've got a problem with your tefillin. Or there's a certain lacking in concentration in your prayer in the morning. Or there's a lacking in kosher. You're not eating kosher. Certain things he would see in a person, say immediately, it's because there's a mitzvah that person is like. We have 365 negative mitzvot, meaning don't do's in Judaism, and 248 positive commandments. The 248 positive commandments represent the different limbs in our body. People may argue, because scientifically the number's a bit different, but it doesn't make a difference. Judaism has labeled each limb in the numerical number of 248. The same number of words we have in Shema. Also, when we say Shema, there's 248 words in them. There's 248 positive commandments. They represent the limbs of our body. And according to Jewish teaching, if there's something wrong in my body, it's actually connected to something spiritual that's missing in me. It's an interesting idea. We get to the core of the problem. There's always a spiritual cause behind it, as well as the physical reality that there is, okay? So when Rabbi Akiva lost his 24,000 students, everyone looked at it as a plague, but Rabbi Akiva understood of it differently. They didn't respect each other properly. And that's why at this time of the year, we have the story of this Rabbi Akiva and everything. It fits in very much with the time of the year. It happened to be at this, the story was nothing to do with it, but it happened to be at this time of the year when we got the Torah, when we were receiving the Torah. And part of receiving the Torah, becoming the Jewish people, is the challenge of being so connected to God, the same problem that Rabbi Akiva had, of being so connected to God, not Rabbi Akiva himself, but his students, right? That you neglect the people around you. So this ties in to the idea of leprosy as well. So according to Judaism, there still is, leprosy is still somewhat going on, right? So still a disease that in poor countries, there is still the disease of leprosy. So leprosy is directly connected to Lashon Hara. 2 Torah portions that talks about leprosy. And it's interesting because the Torah doesn't give me a cure, a physical cure to leprosy. It doesn't say cut it off, although that probably wouldn't help anyway. But that it doesn't give me a cure. It tells me about the spiritual cure to leprosy. Because according to Judaism, the same with Rabbi Akiva, we don't look at a problem and say that's the problem. We look at the problem and say, what's the deeper cause behind the problem? What's the spiritual reason behind the problem? That's how we are meant to look at things. Of course, we can actually go into medicine. We are commanded to work with medicine. V'rapo yerapeh is a commandment in Judaism to heal. But at the end of the day, that's not what the Torah is going to do. It's not a book of healing. It's a book which tells me look deeper. Right? Look deeper. Look behind the physical reality. In the physical reality, okay, so there's leprosy. But on a deeper sense, it came from Lashon Hara. And that's something that we learn as well in this week. Very similar to Rabbi Akiva. He had the plague, but he looked deeper and said it was Shelot Nagu Kavod Zeh B'Zeh. There's a famous rabbi, the Chazon Ish, who passed away in the 80s or 90s. Right? The Chazon Ish was one of the greatest rabbis that was there at the founding of Israel, was there even before. And the Chazon Ish lived in Bnei Brak, big rabbi, a Kabbalistic rabbi, and he knew everything. He was one of these Kabbalistic, he knew everything. You would go to him, he'd know everything. And they once asked him, Rabbi, would you be able to tell us the cure of cancer? Whenever someone's sick, he would tell them exactly, he'd even speak to the doctors, tell them exactly what that person does, what needs. Rabbi, will you have a cure to cancer? He says, even if I did, there'll be something else that will come in place. Because cancer's not the problem. It's where it starts, which is the problem. Right? It's not the physical problem. There's a spiritual root to the problem. You remove that problem, there'll be another one coming in anyway. And who knows, if cancer is removed, something else which is made way worse will come into the world. Who knows what can come after? He said, even if I did have a cure, a physical cure, there may be something much worse. Here's an interesting point. We learn about Chizkiah HaMelech, Chizkiah the king. He did 6 things. 3 of them, the rabbis praised him for. 3 of them, they were upset with him for. What are the 3 things that Chizkiah HaMelech did that they loved about him? Listen to this. His father was did a lot of bad for the Jewish people. Very, very bad. So he dragged his father's bones al mitah shel chavalim after he passed away, in a certain sense of disrespect. Even though it was his father, he had him pulled on a bed of strings. Okay, there's another whole story behind that. Kitat nechoshet hanechoshet, nachash hanechoshet. He took the snake that Moses, this was way before Chizkiah, the snake that's written in the Torah where Moses used to heal the people. There was a copper snake that he created. You know, on every ambulance, you have the snake on a stick, right? You've seen that on an ambulance? That's the sign of healing. Why? Because there was a plague amongst the Jewish people, and Moshe Rabbeinu put a stick with this copper snake, and everyone would look at it, and they would do teshuvah, and they would repent, and they would get healed. That was how he healed them. So Chizkiah saw that this snake was being used towards idol worship and decided to melt it down and completely disintegrate it into the world. He did that so that no one would serve this snake. And there's one last thing that he did. Ganaz Sefer Refuot. He hid the book of medicine. There was a book of medicine that Chizkiah had. It was dated back to before him. A special book that if anyone would use it, it would have the heal of any sickness in the world. Anyone who got sick, this book would be able to heal you. You just open the book and you see what your problem is, and it would have the answer to your problem. Can you imagine? Wouldn't you want such a book? Chizkiah hid it. So there's a big argument amongst the rabbis why he was praised for doing that. Rashi says he was praised because if everyone had this book, if they would have printed this book and made many copies of it, then no one would pray. The minute everyone would get sick is they'll be like, hey, give me the book, right? Instead of praying to try and heal. Everyone would be satiated in their health. So they would say, what do I need God for anyway? No one would try and improve themselves. No one would question themselves. No one would think, oh my gosh, why is this happening to me? Right? They would just say, give me the book. So it was a disconnect from godliness. And if that book would have been promoted, then people wouldn't pray to be healed. Maimonides does not like that answer. He looks at it differently. Maimonides was a doctor. And Maimonides explains that if this book was a book of healing, of medicine, then what's wrong with medicine? There's nothing wrong with medicine. That's promoted in Judaism. In Judaism, it's good to be healed. So why would that be a problem? The opposite. Chizkiah would be bad for hiding this book, right? It would be wrong for him to hide this book. He should have promoted this book because he would have healed the world. So Maimonides actually says that the problem wasn't that he had a book of healing, because that's a mitzvah in the Torah to heal people, but it was a book of healing that used the wrong way of healing. It wasn't using the right way of healing. Something on those lines. So for that reason, he hid it. But according to Maimonides, natural medicine for sure is something that you should promote, of course. But either way, the message is clear. Rashi is trying to teach me, and the message here is very clear. When there's a sickness, never go to the wrong place and think that the problem is the sickness. I wish we have a doctor that can heal it. I wish we could fix it. We're going to make the effort to heal it, but don't ever think that that's the root of the problem. That's how we react. That's called acting like the dog. How does the dog act? When the stick hits him, he goes running to the stick and says, right, he wants the stick, not the person that's holding the stick. One of the ways of a dog is that when it gets hit with a stick, it runs after the stick, not the one that starts it. That's how we work as well in our world as well. When there's a problem, what do? We run after the problem as opposed to asking, what's the deeper reason here? What's going on here? What are we missing? Where are our values? Give you an example. There's a shooting, let's say, God forbid. There's been many. Right? So immediately, where was the security? That's how everyone reacts. Where was the security guards? How did he have a gun? How? That's the wrong way of reacting. According to Judaism, the way that we react is, what is the spiritual DNA behind this? It's true. We've got to increase our physical security. We've got to do everything we can. But immediately after something happens, that's the question? No, we've got to get to the core of it. What is wrong with our values? Why is this happening? What's wrong? Right? Getting into the spiritual cause behind it is so much more important than getting to the external cause behind the problem. Because that's how we normally react. You're fighting the stick. What's the spiritual reason behind it? That's the question that we need to ask. So that's the story with Chizkiah HaMelech. He hid the book of healing. Why? Because if he had that book of medicine, no one would be looking for the spiritual reasons behind things. They would always say, it's a physical problem, let's fix it physically. But really, this physical world is a manifestation of a spiritual world. When there's a physical problem, it's because deep down rooted, there's a spiritual problem as well. There's a whole Talmud, a list in the Talmud, a list of things that proves this idea. We never only look at the physical causes, we look at the spiritual reasons behind it. Now, according to Judaism, someone can physically hurt himself. Why am I unhealthy? Because I eat bad. Because I eat unhealthy. That can happen. So you might tell me that's nothing to do with a spiritual problem. I have the physical ability to damage myself for sure. But even if I do make those choices, what caused me to make that choice is something I need to ask. What's the spiritual reason that got into my brain that caused me to make that choice? What was I watching? What was I seeing? What influence did I have? What friends do I have? These are the questions, right? It's the spiritual questions I need to ask. So here's a whole Talmud, okay? This is a very interesting Talmud. I'm going to slowly read different stories. So there's a Talmud in Megillah, 27b, the Talmud of Tractate of Megillah, which is about Purim, 27b. And in this Talmud, there's a list of many, many rabbis that were asked, B'ma ha'erachta yamim? How did you have such a long life? How were you zocher? How did you merit to have such a long life? Many, many rabbis, you should look at Jewish history, many rabbis live for many years, 90, 100 years. The Chafetz Chaim, Reb Chaim Kanievsky of today, may he live for many more years. He's already well over 90. Rabbi Ovadia Yosef, all the big rabbis of each generation, they live for many years. There have been cases where they've lived for very short, like the Ramchal, the Ramah. Ramchal lived for 37 years. I think the Ramah, Rav Moshe Isserles, the head of the Ashkenazic authority, of halachic authority, he lived for 30-something years, wrote the most extensive works and lived for only 30 years. Can you imagine? So there are many great rabbis that lived for a long time. And the students would go to them and say, hey, Rabbi, how did you live for so long? Now, that question in a spiritual world can be asked, but in a physical world, you can't ask that. How did I live long? Because I was lucky. How did I live long? Because I was healthy. In a physical only world, then you're going to get physical answers only. How did you live long? Because you physically were doing the right things. Well, I could give you a list of hundreds of people that are physically healthy and suddenly they lose their life at the age of 30. There's lists, hundreds. There's hundreds of people that get killed at a certain age. So no one's guaranteed to live long. So there's a list in the Talmud of hundreds, not hundreds, but many, many rabbis that were asked this question. B'ma he'erachta yamim? How did you live long? And each one of them gave different answers. I want to read you the answers that they gave. But what we do see is, number one is that they were looking for spiritual reasons behind it. You might say that this is not humble of them. When you go up to someone and say, how did you live long? Right? It's not humble of them. Yeah, because if you're looking at the spiritual reasons behind it, they want to help others to live long. They want to help others to find the spiritual reasons behind how they can be successful. So this is the language. They asked Rabbi Zakkai, one of the rabbis of the Talmud. His students asked him, how did you live so long? Amar lahem, he says back to them, never in my life did I go within 4 amot of prayer near the bathroom. I never prayed a word within 4 meters of where I pray. I never went to the bathroom within 4 meters of where I pray. Never. Okay, interesting little tidbit here. But he continues. I did something else which was good in my life, unique. I didn't call my friends a name. I didn't call them a name. And I never annulled kiddush. So he says, I never went to the bathroom and I prayed. I didn't call people names. I didn't, call them nicknames. I never in my life stopped doing kiddush. I always, my whole life, I did kiddush with wine. Kiddush means on Shabbat, on Friday night, I did it with wine. And he says, I had an old mother. And once, in order that we should have kiddush, she sold her headscarf, a nice headscarf that she had. She sold it in order that we could do Kiddush. And the rabbis say when she passed away, she left 300 barrels of wine, or certain amounts of wine. They had money. And eventually, when this rabbi passed away, he was a young man when his mother passed away, but when he passed away, he left for his children 3,000 barrels of wine. Or maybe it's big storages of wine. Tremendously, he was very wealthy at the end of his life. So this rabbi, they asked him, how did you live long? And he gave a list of reasons. They go to the next rabbi, he's going to say different reasons. They go to the next rabbi, he says a different reason. How come? Because each one of these rabbis saw that this was the place that they went out of their way for, even though it was very difficult for them to do. It's called in Hebrew vitul. They were able to compromise, even when it was very difficult for them. So for the first story that I just told you about, he compromised because in his upbringing, they didn't even have enough clothing, and his mother had to sell her clothing so that they can have wine for Shabbat. That's a tremendous sacrifice. When someone's able to do that, then God sacrifices for you and keeps you alive much longer than you need to be. Rav Huna, another story. There's another rabbi where they came up to him and they asked him, how did you live long? Let me see where. So this rabbi, his name was Rav Huna. He would have a belt of straw. He was so poor that his belt was made with straw. He used hay to make his belt. So his Rav, one of the rabbis, came to him and said to him, why are you living like this? My high, how are you like this? He says to him, I didn't have Kiddush for Shabbat, and I sold this belt. I used to have a belt, and I sold it for Kiddush. It was a nice leather belt. I sold it for Kiddush. So the rabbi blessed him. He says, may it be the will of Hashem that you should be very wealthy, and you should not only be wearing leather, he says to him, you should be wearing clothes of silk. You should be covered in silk. Very interesting story. So it says that Rav Huna, when he got older, Rav Huna was a short man, and his children got married. And when his daughter-in-laws came into the house, very interesting story here. When his daughter-in-laws came into the house, they took off their silk jackets. They were very wealthy already by that point, and he was an older man. They took off their silk jackets, threw it onto the chair. Rav Huna was studying Torah, and he was completely covered with this silk. And basically the blessing came to reality. When he got old, he was covered in silk, like the rabbi told him, may it be the will of Hashem that you'll be covered in silk. So when Rabbi heard this story, that the blessing came true, he got upset with him. Rabbi was the one that blessed him originally. He was the one that originally blessed Rav Huna and told him, may it be the will of God that one day you'll be wearing completely covered in silk. And this story, the blessing came true. So Rabbi came to him and he was upset with him. And he says to him, why did you, when I blessed you that you should be covered in silk, why didn't you say, v'chen lemar, similarly to you? There's a rule in Jewish teaching. When someone blesses you, right, in Hebrew, you say, v'chen lemar. And so shall be for the one that says it. So if I, let's say to Eitan, you should be healthy, you should be strong, you should live a long life. So how do you respond back? You say, v'chen lemor. So shall it be for the one that says. Whatever you bless me, I bless you back. So Rabbi was upset. He says to him, why didn't you say to me, v'chen lemor? I gave you a blessing. You should have said, and so it should be back to you. But you didn't do that, and I wasn't merited to have so much wealth like you did. There's many, many stories here of people that had a long life. Should I continue? Rabbi Eliezer ben Shammua, another rabbi, they asked him, how did you live so long? So he says to them, Miyamai lo asiti kampandria lebet knesset. I never went on a short path through the synagogue. I never made the shul a shortcut. Oh, if I walk through the synagogue and I get on the other side, it'll be easy for me. That will be my shortcut. Instead of going around the whole street, just walk through the synagogue. He never did that. He never made the synagogue a shortcut for him. If he had to go along a path, he'll go all the way around it, but never walk through a synagogue just to be used as a shortcut. He says, "Velo pasati al rashay am kadosh." I also never stepped over the heads of the people that were studying Torah. So back in those days, they would sit and study Torah on the floor. Like it says in Pirkei Avot, when it says that Hevei mitabek ba'avak shel tamidei chachamim, get dusty with the dust of the scholars. Why? Because they used to sit on the floor, and the floor was filled with dust, and everyone would study with next to each other on the floor. So he says, I never walked over the heads of someone that was studying. You know, when you have a big crowd of people on the floor sitting and studying, you might say, oh, okay, I need to get out. I need the bathroom. So you know what? I'll climb over someone. He never did that. Never in his life did he climb over someone's head. Velo nasati kapai belo bacha. And he was a Kohen. He says, I never gave a blessing of the Kohen, a priestly blessing, without making a blessing first, without making a bracha first. All these things that they said were things that they went out of their way for. When he says that I didn't go the shortcut through the synagogue, probably because it was a time where he needed to go through the shortcut, and it was extremely important. He had a very good excuse, and yet he still didn't do it. Right? That was their unique qualities, that they were what we call in Hebrew moser nefesh. They gave over the soul in order not to do these things. They sacrificed a lot in order to not do these things. And because of that, they had long life. They asked Rabbi Preda, another rabbi, they said to him, how did you live long? He says, in my life, never did somebody come to the synagogue before me. I always was the first one then. Velo berachti lifnei kohen. And I never made a blessing in front of a kohen, meaning before a kohen. I'm not sure what that means here. I think maybe it's the same as beforehand, where I always made the blessing first. I also didn't eat from an animal that was given as a gift to the Kohen. It was meant to be given as a gift. I never ate from it. So another list of things. They asked another rabbi, Nechunya ben Hakaneh, they asked him, how did you live long? He says, I never succeeded. I never got successful in the fall of my friend. Meaning I never got honor through the fact that my friend fell or was lower down. It was never on the expense. That's the right word. I never succeeded on the expense of my friend. What does that mean? We'll see. And he says, I never went to sleep cursing out my friend. I never had in my heart a curse for my friend. I was never angry with my friend ever before I went to bed. Which, by the way, is a very important thing. Never go to sleep with an argument. According to Jewish teaching, we're meant to always say before we go to sleep, I forgive everyone that has hurt me. Right? Because that way you can leave this world in peace with the world. So never, especially in marriage, in a relationship, you never go to bed. This is where we get it from. If already with other people you don't go to bed in an argument, all the more so with your own spouse, you don't go into bed in an argument. So they asked him, he says, I never was successful or honored in the expense of my friends. I never went onto my bed angry with my friends, cursing out my friends. And I compromised when it came to money. Whenever it came to money and there was an argument, I say, fine, you have it. I always compromised when it came to money. So when he says, I never got successful on the expense of my friends, he gave an example. He says, like once, there was this, like Rav Huna, who was once carrying a special type of axe. It was a big machine. And it wasn't respectful for him to carry it. So another rabbi came running to Rav Huna and says to him, hey, let me carry it. It was Rav Chana. He says to him, let me carry it. Why are you carrying this? I'll do it. So Rav Huna says, he says back to him, if in your town it's normal for you to carry this thing, then I let you do it. But if in your town it's not normal to carry this thing, then I'm not going to walk around letting you carry it and me just walking free. Meaning, I'm going to have respect on the expense of you? No way. I'm going to give it over to you just because, and then you shouldn't be, then so that I shouldn't be embarrassed, but you will? I'm going to carry it. That's what he said. I'll never, ever, and Rav Huna was the greatest, yet he never wanted to get respect on the expense of someone else. A very important lesson, by the way. Right? If you want somebody to help you or someone offers to help you, even a child, at any point in your life, someone offers to help you, always ask, is it on the expense of that person? Is it that that person now, by helping me, they are belittling themselves? Are they embarrassing themselves for me? That's something that's not healthy. Because the same way I don't want to be embarrassed with it, then why should they be? Never allow someone to be embarrassed for you or to take an embarrassment for you. Right? That's what he meant. So he says, I never went on my bed cursing my friends. That's like the teaching of Metzora, who said that when someone goes to bed, he should shari le lekol man detzaran. I forgive. He should forgive, let go. Forgiveness is called shari. Like I let go. Let go of anyone that's caused you pain. Anyone that's caused you pain before you sleep, you let it go. By the way, this is not somebody who needs to be rebuked, right? There's some people that need to be told off. I gave a whole class on when to forgive, when you should forgive and when you shouldn't forgive. But you're not meant to forgive someone that does something wrong. If they are doing something wrong, according to the Torah, then by you forgiving them, you're encouraging that behavior. Right? We spoke about this in the past. You're only meant to forgive in a case, sometimes you're actually meant to not forgive. Because when you do forgive, you're letting them continue that bad behavior. Forgiveness is not always something that we're meant to do. But in general, if it's necessary and you're able to forgive, then you should, like it says here. He forgave anyone that caused him problems. And that's what you should do at night. And also, I would compromise when it came to money. As it says, Iyov vatran b'moneh haveh, shaya maniach pruta lechem v'ni b'moneh. It says by Iyov that he was a person that gave it. He would always compromise when it came to money. He would always give a tip to the shopkeeper. He would always leave extra money because he never wanted to be a person that lost in the deal or that caused the loss to someone else in a deal. He would rather them have the upper hand. Always. Okay. There's many, many stories. I'm not going to go through them all. But you see clearly, another rabbi says, I never got gifts. Also, I gave him money. Never took gifts. There's so many interesting things. This is very interesting. Like Rabbi Eliezer. Here's a very interesting story. The leaders of the people would give him many gifts. Mibei Nasiah, from the house of the Nasi. The leader of the Jewish people would give him many gifts. Rabbi Eliezer was a big tzaddik. And he would never take the gifts. So they invited him to a conference meeting, to speak. You're the big rabbi, come. Lo have azil. He would never go. He said, no, I can't go. I'm not going. So they said to him, they begged him until a point he says, listen, do you not know what it says in Kohelet? It says, Soneh matanot yichya, that the person that hates gifts has a long life. It's told, if you hate gifts, you have a long life. There's sometimes where you should take a gift, because when you take a gift from someone, right, then you're actually giving to them. By taking, you're giving to them. But there's many times where we take and we're actually not giving to that person that gives. We're actually causing them to really feel like they're giving, and that's not good. That they're being taken advantage from. That's not good. Soneh matanot yicheh. Someone who hates gifts lives long. So he says to them, you don't know that this verse, someone who hates gifts lives long? Leave me alone. There was another rabbi, Rabbi Zera, that he would also be given lots of gifts. He would never take the gifts. But when they asked him to come to the conference, he said, yes, he would. Why? Because he said, that is not a gift to me. They are taking from me because they feel like there's an honor if I go. So when I go to that event and I'm sitting there, they're happy that I came. So actually that's a benefit for them, not for me. I don't like it. I don't want this honor. But when I go, they feel like I'm honoring them and they're happy. So actually I'm giving to them. You see, whenever I'm giving, then it's good. When I'm taking, it's not good. So that was another reason one rabbi said that I lived long. They asked another rabbi, why did you live long? Oh, one amalok katzta b'chayai. Oh, here's a very interesting reason. Oh, because I was ma'avir al midotav. I always gave in when I came into an argument. I always gave in. And someone who overcomes their temptations and gives in when it comes to arguments or whatever it is on your personality, when you're able to overcome arguments in terms of your personality, then God also overcomes himself on you because, sometimes we do the wrong thing. So just like you overcame with others and you didn't get angry with them, so too does God overcome with you. And he's over al pesha. He ignores the wrong that you did, just like you ignored the wrong that others did to you. Okay, so there's many stories, very, very interesting. But what we see here clearly is that the cause of good is not simply a physical cause. We have to look and say, okay, why did this person live long? They lived long physically because they were healthy, they were careful, they were cautious with themselves for sure. But there's another deeper reason behind it. What's the spiritual reason? And that's what we need to be doing, is asking ourselves in every situation, what's the spiritual reason behind it? Whether it's successful or not successful, we need to ask, what is the cause behind it? What's the spiritual DNA behind it? Because that's what we want to have. We want to look into the spiritual behind the physical and see what is that cause. Just like Rabbi Akiva did. Okay. It's 9:10 already. But that's this week's Torah portion as well. This week's Torah portion is about leprosy, lashon hara. It's called Metzora. A Metzora is motzi shem ra. Someone who talks and brings out a negative name about somebody else. Says something negative about someone. It causes him to have a bad name. Today, it's very common online, very easy. The minute someone does something slightly wrong, says something wrong, his life is ruined. Someone once said, I think it was Rabbi Sachs who once said, it's an unforgiving culture. The minute I go into a restaurant, I don't like the food, I'll write a bad review. What about the guy who's been working for years to build his business? Never mind. I don't like his food, bad review. Right? It's an unforgiving culture. The minute that the person has a bad review or a negative post about him online, okay, so he made a mistake. He was, I don't know, they were being slightly rude. Doesn't mean that they need to be embarrassed on Twitter and publicized to the entire world and have 1 million views. It's unfair. Right? It's an unforgiving culture. So that's called motzi shem ra. That's actually forbidden. You have to be very careful when you post a negative review about someone. If it's about a company, it's a different story. But about a person directly, posting their face and their video of them doing something wrong is not really the way that we should be. We should be thinking 10 times before we post something like that. And that's called motzi shem ra. What's the cure? You go alone. The cure to lashon hara is actually quarantine, like many of us are in today. right? To go in quarantine, to be alone. Why? Because midah keneged midah. Everything in Judaism is measure for measure. Exactly what you wanted on that person is exactly how Hashem brings back to you. So leprosy, the way to heal leprosy is to be alone, to be quarantined. You're contagious. And when a person's alone, what happens? You start realizing that's exactly what I wanted for that person. When I caused them a sense of defamation, I caused them a bad name. So what I did was I excluded them from society. My job of Lashon Hara, of Motzi Shem Ra, is literally to put that person alone. What does Hashem do? He says, that's what you wanted for them. That's exactly what happens back to you. Quarantine. We are also placed alone. And that's midah keneged midah. So, Lashon Hara, gossip, is obvious when it's in front of the person. But when it's not in front of the person, it's not so obvious. Why is it so bad? To a point where it says, En lo chelek le'olam haba. A person that does that without asking forgiveness doesn't have a portion in the world to come. Causing someone else an embarrassment is a form of killing them. It's not that you kill them literally, but it's a form of killing them. The azil sumka ve'ati chivra, it says in the Talmud, which means that the blood gets drawn and then the body goes white, starts off red and then it goes white because blood has been drawn. It's a nuance of killing according to Jewish teaching. And therefore, en lo chelek le'olam haba. A person who does that has no portion in the world to come. He must immediately ask forgiveness and work towards becoming better in this regard. This is obviously there's always room for teshuvah, repentance. But a person needs to get out of it. This is a negative environment to be in. A person must not be in it. But when a person's not around, he's not there, you might say, what's wrong with that? The Talmud said it's like idol worship. Because it's not about the person, it's about the oneness that we feel with people. We are in this world to become one with each other. God put us in this world, He is one. God is infinite. But He put us into a world where it is finite, where it's kind of broken. There's good here, there's bad here, there's confusion here, everything's broken. And our job in this world is to bring that oneness of God. Many times people see bad in the world. They say, there's no God. Why? Because the world is so broken. How can there be a oneness of God? It's like idol worship. Idol worship. What was idol worship? Where I'd say that there's a power, there's a strength for water, and there's another power called fire. There's wind. How can these are opposing energies. How can they all be part of one? Right? That's the physical world. I see that there's lots of opposing energies. How can they all be one? So I come to serve each one of them. There's a God of fire. There's a God of water. There's a God. That's how idol worship worked. So in this world, the way that we see the physical world seems like there's many different powers. And what we as humans have to do is bring them back together as one. That's the power of the human being. We have the koach, we have the strength to do that as a human. To bring us together, just like what God is one, we have to be one as well. It says, Kudsha berichu ve'oraite ve'Yisrael chadhu. God, the Torah, and the Jewish people are all one. What does that mean? That we're all aiming for this oneness. That's the goal, is to aim for oneness. That's why giving is such an important aspect in this world. Because what we're doing is we're bringing oneness. That's the goal of humanity. So that's why it says that someone who speaks Lashon Hara, gossip, it's a nuance of killing. It's also, if you embarrass the person, but it's also a nuance of idol worship. Why idol worship? Because you're causing separation in the world. Just like idol worship tries to do, is causing a separation in the world by saying that there's more than one God. What we're doing in this world when we speak Lashon Hara is also causing separation between humanity. And we've got to bring us together. Okay, So there's much more that we could speak about, but I think that's it for today. And I'm so glad that you're all here and listening, and may we all come to this oneness together and have long life, longevity, arichut yamim.
Amen.
May there be something that you are willing to sacrifice, because that could be your key to success and long life, like all these rabbis that sacrifice something for the good. But what is it? What is it that you're willing to sacrifice for the good? Because that will be your key to longevity. Okay, so when you spoke, thank you. Just to recap a little bit, what we spoke about is the plague of Rabbi Akiva, and Rabbi Akiva, 24,000 students. He lost his students. He didn't look at the plague. He looked at the cause behind it, the spiritual DNA behind it. And that was because lo nagu kavod ze bazem, because they got so strong between them and God, they got weaker between them and other humans. And that's exactly the right timing of between Passover and Shavuot. It's the counting the Omer. We're getting closer to God, but then we also have the challenge of neglecting other humans. And then we went into the whole idea of plagues and the whole idea of looking into the spiritual behind the physical, not blaming the physical. That's just the symptom. If somebody's got a bad leg, there's a spiritual reason behind the bad leg. Right? If someone's got a bad pain, there's a spiritual reason behind that pain. It's not a physical cause. There's something deeper behind it. And we spoke about leprosy and how the Torah gives us a cure, but a different cure than a physical one. It could have, God created the world. He could have easily written a physical cure, but the physical cure is not the problem. There's a spiritual problem behind it. Just like Chizkiah the king, who hid his book of healings. And then we spoke about a whole list of rabbis that lived long, and they asked them, how did you live long? Because they sacrificed something. And when you sacrifice something that you're willing to live for, you can get blessed for it. But they didn't look and say, oh, I lived long because of physicality. They all gave spiritual reasons to their longevity. And that reason for that is because when you live that lifestyle, when you live a spiritual life, then the cause behind everything isn't a physical cause. You see the deeper reasons behind it. You know why I lived long? Yeah, I was healthy. I followed the health rules, of course. But I also lived long because I never called people names. I did spiritual things. I always did kiddush or whatever it was that they were sacrificing. When I see myself in a spiritual lens, then I can say that's the reason of my success, not my physical success. That's how I need to look at my life. And that is also connected to Motzi Shemra, Lashon Hara, gossip. It's all connected as well, because they would get the leprosy, and the way to heal them was not a physical one. The way to heal them was spiritual. Oh.